This is lecture C05, sandwich and prefab elements. Here we're going to talk a bit about large-scale construction components being installed as facade elements. Typically, the main structure is still separate, and then the facade elements, either sandwiches or prefab elements, are installed in front of it. What we see in this slide is, say, the main structure being at the back, and then various sets of how these prefab components could be added, floor height, horizontal oriented substructure, with then the components being added, substructure of certain sandwich components, maybe even small components being added. And this could be divided in these three general setups. We start with these horizontal sandwich panels, which can be brought in position, or the vertical sandwich panels, which can be brought in position. Then obviously the load from the top and the bottom needs to be transported by the panel and then brought into the main structure. Or we talk about prefab components, which envelope the entire grid system as a principal setup in this package. When we talk about sandwich panels, we have two types of sandwich panels. It's either the composite panel, which means there's an inner and outer cladding, which is then connected with a mostly insulating structure, polyurethane form. Could be in material to do so, because it can be expanded within these two layers of sheet metal, for example, and then keep this whole thing in position, versus an assembled sandwich element, which means we do have timber structure with some insulation structure. We even in this sample have a ventilated situation with then an outer layer, an inner layer, which then have to function as the surfaces, the airtightness and the rain screen, as we discussed it already several times. This is a typical PU form setup. We see in this sample an inner and an outer sheet metal. The outer sheet metal is curved for aesthetic reason, maybe also structural reason, but in this situation with the PU being embedded, this is more for aesthetical reason. And the PU laminates actually these two layers of sheet metal together so that they act as an structural unit, as a total structural unit. These systems are connected by these interfaces. These interfaces are designed in that way that there are some compressible strips in here which secure that if you connect them and click them into each other, that this whole interface is airtight and rain-tight, airtight at the inside, rain-tight at the outside, as a total system. Very proven setups, quite easy to assembly, budget-wise very reasonable, which brings this to be a very normal structure for industry production plants, things like this, because it's so simple and easy to be handled. The assembled sheet metal panel setup shown here. There's an inner sheet metal, which is say cold rolled in a set that the geometry allows that an insulation can be added, and then there's an outer sheet metal which is installed on top of this to create this entire insulated unit as an assembled sandwich panel package. Again, this is something which is say very reasonable qua budgets, so used for large structures, but does not perform that well in the means of acoustics, which brings us to the next pre-assembled structures. A sample which is done more in housing, especially in the Netherlands, for example, for high-rise housing, are these prefab elements in concrete. We see the prefab elements short before being transported in this situation. That's a full height and a full length of a grid system of the building. We see when we go to the far right picture, this is the inner load-bearing concrete layer. This is the outer rain screen layer, and we see here in this area there's insulation visible. It's here covered. This is the insulation layer, and then this whole thing is connected as a typical masonry structure, as a total construction. This is the way how it is done. This is the masonry brought into a molding situation. Then there's the steel reinforcement brought. They even install already all the electricity cabling and fixing devices like this one here, which we see here being brought, and then the whole prefab unit is brought on site and installed as a prefab unit. A concrete prefab versus a wood or timber prefab system. See again, floor height. Same setup. Here we see the fixing of these devices, top part, side. There's some horizontal fixing which takes some loads in here. We see it's an entire timber structure. This entire timber structure covers the inner layer, the outer layer. This is already finished plasterboard at the inside. This is a prefab set in the way that there's a breathable foil at the outer cavity, which is then later being closed with a masonry structure as a total system. These are sandwich systems and prefab element systems to be defined. And again, this is where the whole thing comes from. The TU Delft, TU Darmstadt, TU München facade education project. With this, I stop this one.